A Mucky Business with Tim Farron.
Hello and welcome. This is A Mucky Business and I am Tim Farron. This is the show where you get to hear from a Christian who works either in or through the mucky business of politics. Of course, you might well think that politics is tainted by compromise and sin. And of course, you'd be right. But then again, so is everything else. And I think Christians should be praying for their brothers and sisters who are involved in politics in an informed way. Well, today we're going to be joined by the Labour MP, Marsha de Cordova. She became a Labour MP for Battersea at the 2017 snap general election, was re-elected in 2019, and has since served on the front bench as the Shadow Secretary of State for Women and Equality, stepping back from that role just a few months ago. We're going to be discussing apartheid, her faith, and disability equality. But before that, I would like to talk about something that nobody appears to be talking about. With all the noise over Christmas parties that shouldn't have happened last year, and that may or may not be happening this year, most people will have missed the Nationality and Borders Bill, which passed through the Commons last week. Amongst the things that this bill would do is to give our government the power to remove British citizenship from nearly 6 million British dual nationals, and to do so without warning them. As of last week, the government may remove, if it's agreed by the House of Lords, any dual nationals' UK citizenship for any reason, and it can do so without even contacting the person involved. Now, of course, ministers will understandably say that they would only ever use this power in rare and extreme circumstances regarding people who had done something appalling. Yet the new powers mean that they pretty much could exclude anyone. And just think about this. If I did something utterly appalling, I might get sentenced to life in prison, but the government wouldn't take my citizenship off me. Why? Well, because I've pretty much only got a British family heritage for as long back as I'm aware. So what the government has done is to say that the citizenship of people whose British family history isn't as lengthy as mine isn't as important as mine. It's basically saying that someone whose family migrated to the UK is less British than me. When we look at our Bible, we know that our God considers no one to be a non-person. Every hair of your head is numbered, so every hair of every head is numbered. You are of infinite value to the God who created you. He knows you inside and out. He died for you. No one has the right to tell you that you are no one. Christmas tells us that our God chose to be born on the outside. I mean, literally born outside, but also to a marginalized young woman, unmarried at the time of conception, who with her new husband was then forced to flee. A refugee family running from the murderous attention of a king. 3 decades later, this child would become the ultimate outsider, rejected by the people, betrayed or deserted by his friends, taken outside the city walls, subject to crucifixion. A form of execution meant not just to kill you, but to expose and humiliate you as you suffer publicly without pity. A defeated man, a worthless man. My point is that our God knows exactly what it is to be excluded. Next to him hung others who were excluded, those two thieves. Grievous and utterly excessive though their punishment was, nevertheless, they had committed crimes. Yet we know that Jesus extended a welcome to those excluded men, a welcome that one of them reached out for and received. Let's be blunt. Those who are on the sharp end of this new law are not society's most visible nor popular people. That's a good reason for Christians to be mindful of them. Proverbs 31, verse 8 tells us, "Open your mouth for the mute." In Deuteronomy 10:19, God commands his people to love the sojourner. Therefore, for you were sojourners in the land of Egypt. The Bible is full of commands to care for those whose voice isn't usually heard and whose home hasn't always been here. God usually accompanies that command with a reminder that they too were once outsiders and that God rescued them from that state. Christians are those who, whilst once being enemies of God, have been rescued according to his grace. To my mind, Christians have an explicit duty then to care for those whom others may seek to exclude. Probably most of you listening are not amongst the nearly 6 million people who would now be eligible to lose their citizenship. But one of the things I want this podcast to achieve is to introduce Christians to issues that might otherwise fly under our radar. Maybe after exploring this issue, you will decide that the government is right to give itself this power. And I wouldn't expect you to automatically agree with my opinion on this. You must ponder this for yourself. But I am bound to say that even if we think that this government wouldn't abuse this power to strip people of their Britishness at the stroke of a pen, it seems naive to me to think these powers will always be used correctly. What about some future government? This feels to me a ready-made toolkit for someone with far worse motives. As Christians, we know that we've been afforded the greatest inclusion, to be grafted into God's very family. Our compassion for others and our compulsion to speak up for those least valued by the world should, in my view, lead to us to be deeply concerned by this move. And as the House of Lords now scrutinises this legislation, we might pray for compassion and wisdom for those in Parliament in the hope that this matter might yet be revisited. After all, this is the season where we celebrate the arrival into this world of the ultimate outsider.
A Mucky Business with Tim Farron.
And so to our guest, Marsha de Cordova is the Member of Parliament for Labour for Battersea. She gained the seat in 2017 for the Conservatives, held it in 2019. She served on the Labour front bench as the Shadow Secretary of State for Women Inequalities and still serves very much at the front line of British politics. And most importantly, she's with us now. Welcome, Marsha.
Good morning, Tim. Lovely to see you.
It's great to have you with us. Well, given the nature of this podcast, we're going to ask you the most important question. Tell us about your faith. How did you become a Christian? How did that journey happen?
Yeah, of course. So growing up, we were brought up going to Sunday school, but to say, it wouldn't be right for me to say that I had a relationship with Jesus Christ or, had a strong faith. And I'll say as well, it wasn't like a big thing that happened that made me turn to Christ. I think, when I was probably in my early 20s, possibly, early to mid 20s, I knew that something was missing from my life. And I remember walking into a Christian bookshop in Southwest London, and I bought a Bible. Couldn't understand it because it was the King James version, so it wasn't the easiest. But anyway, nonetheless, one of my best friends invited me along to her church, and I went along, and I thought, this is okay, but not really for me. And then another friend invited me to their church, so clearly something's happening. And I went along to this particular church, I won't mention, but honestly, Tim, it was all very lights, camera, action. They were singing, there was a band, there was lots of jumping around. And I just thought, this is not church as I know it. And I thought, okay, I left. But, I kept going back to that church, even without the friend that invited me. Something was just drawing me back to that church, and just the messages about Christ and so forth really, resonated with me. And it was in that church that I made that commitment and became a Christian. And I got baptized, and I've been following Jesus Christ and trying to live out my best life ever since.
And was there a particular passage in the Bible or a particular story or a sermon that really resonated with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I do remember, I think it was around about Easter time, so in that kind of period. And it was the message, when Jesus was washing the feet of his disciples. And it was actually that Sunday that I made the commitment, because, Jesus, who he is and who he was and continues to be, but the humility of him when he was actually, being a servant to his disciples was just, that really did resonate with me. And I suppose each of us, whether in politics or in whatever walk of life, we are all servants of the Lord as well.
And politics is something that you were interested in, whether you would have called it politics, but from a relatively early age. Tell me a little bit about how that came onto your radar.
Well, what I should say is I didn't grow up saying I wanted to be a member of Parliament. That definitely wasn't on my radar, but I did kind of grow up knowing that I wanted to make a difference. I do know that my purpose in life is about being the voice for the voiceless. That's biblical. It's in the book of Proverbs. But as a child growing up, for my 10th birthday, I received a gift from my cousin about Nelson Mandela. Back then, I'm going to be showing my age terribly now, but I was only 10, and it was at the height of the apartheid regime. And I got to learn about this incredible man who had made the ultimate sacrifice, really. He was incarcerated for, 20 odd years, just wanting to be treated equally, wanted justice and equality. And I know that triggered something in me, because from then I was, 10, but I really wanted to understand what was going on. I was reading more about it, talking to my mum about it. In our house, we didn't buy any products that were from South Africa. So, we took our stand in our home, for example. But more importantly, as I continue to follow Mandela, we all remember where we were when he was released from prison that Sunday afternoon, and just his whole character as a man, that his character of forgiveness, but reconciliation, but also being very robust in what he believed and stood for, is something that continues to resonate with me today. He's genuinely one of the people that inspire me, and he's one of my heroes as well. And it's also why I'm very passionate about the rights of Palestinians as well, because where there is injustice, if we remain silent, we become complicit. So I think it's really important that, we stand for justice. And that's how I kind of do my life. That's what really thrust me into politics, because I've obviously spent my career as a lifelong campaigner for disabled people's rights, which I'm sure we'll come on to. But in my career, I was always there, wanting to change the law, change policies, and improve policies, and improve the lives of some of the most vulnerable in society. And to do that, really, you can't sit in the stands or stand on the sidelines and be shouting. You've got to get on court or get on the pitch and be part of that change. And so for me, I stood for local government and became a local councillor. And then when that snap election was called in 2017, I decided to throw my hat in the ring for a seat that was deemed as unwinnable. God clearly had a different plan, and I won that seat in overturn and only 8,000 majority. And, I genuinely, believe it was God breathed, and that was my call into public service by the Lord. And I will do so for as long as he wants me in that position.
Wow. Now, so when that 2017 snap election was called, were you even the candidate at that point?
I wasn't the candidate. And it's funny, actually, because I thought, gosh, loads of people are going to apply for this seat. Because I'm a local person. And so, for me, standing there was about standing somewhere where it was going to be familiar surroundings, because with my vision impairment, it's important to be in an environment that's very familiar to me. So that was kind of why I threw my hat in the ring to Battersea, because it was so close to where I lived. And when I was told that I was going to be the candidate, it's so funny. I thought to myself, okay, great, I'm going to stand in this seat and get some experience. And I even told people I'm just doing it for experience. I told my boss at work, don't worry, I won't win. I'm just doing it for experience. Thankfully, he was very, very, very understanding when I had to hand in my resignation. But it's been an amazing experience, and I do feel truly honoured and privileged to serve and represent the people of Battersea. It's a huge responsibility, but I do it knowing that I'm doing it kind of under God's kind of stewardship as well.
Wow. That's a real overnight thing then, isn't it? A seat that your party didn't hold, where you weren't the candidate, and 6-7 weeks later, you're the member of parliament. So if that isn't God at work somehow, then I don't know what is. So
exactly. That's how I look at it as well. I really prayed about it, and I didn't. If it wasn't the opportunity for me, I really didn't want to be thrust into it. And every door just kept opening, and every opportunity just kept coming my way. So I feel incredibly blessed.
A Mucky Business with Tim Farron.
We're talking to Marsha de Cordova, the Labour MP for Battersea. Marsha, you were very much politicised as a young person by the experience of seeing what was going on in South Africa, apartheid there, and then motivated also very much by Nelson Mandela, the strength of his stance, and then also this amazing forgiveness that he demonstrated to people who had been guilty of quite unspeakable things. I think both of us would agree. Now, as a person who lives with a disability yourself, you're also driven very much to be concerned about equality for people living with disabilities. Tell me about how that's worked its way out in your political life.
Well, for me, I was born with a condition called nystagmus, which is an involuntary and repetitive movement of the eye, causes me to be severely visually impaired, and I'm also registered as severely sight impaired. So my own kind of personal and lived experience has kind of really shaped my life, I suppose, at school, but also at university, and just being a lifelong campaigner for the rights of disabled people. And my career kind of fed into that as well, particularly around disabled people and the social security system and the labour market and employment rights. And so these are issues that I've always campaigned on. And when I became the MP for Battersea, within 3 months, I was asked to serve as the Shadow Minister for Disabled People. Huge honour, recognising also that I had huge shoes to fill because some of my predecessors had done an incredible job in that role. But for me, it was really primarily holding this government to account, the government of the day to account, but also really helping to shape the Labour Party's policy offer for disabled people and for the rights of disabled people. As a political party, we subscribe to what's called the social model of disability. So it's really about the societal barriers that will have a major impact. So, for example, the transport network, it's not inclusive and accessible. So it's not really, whilst the medical model is important, it's the societal challenges that really disable us from being able to fully and equally participate in the society within which we all live.
And you were telling me when we spoke recently about the UN Declaration on the Rights of People with Disabilities, and the United Kingdom doesn't really sign up to that in any effective way. What does that look like? What would it look like if we did?
Yeah, I mean, so the UNCRPD, it was, it's a UN convention, it's internationally recognised, and the last Labour government actually signed up to this, and it really took for successive governments to fully ratify and incorporate that convention into domestic legislation. And unfortunately, what we have seen is for more than a decade of really, I would say, an absolute attack on the rights of disabled people. And whether that's through the clear austerity measures that were introduced to the social security system, to things like abolishing the independent living fund, but also to just some of the measures that have kind of led to the rights of disabled people being infringed. And I should point out, the UN Committee on the Rights of Disabled People that oversees this convention, they investigated the UK a number of years ago. We became the first nation state to be investigated for the rights of disabled people. And they found that the UK government at that time was in a systematic violation of the rights of disabled people. So that really kind of gives you an understanding of how serious it is. Because the convention really, if we are going to be true believers and true followers and actually committed to it, we should be looking at eliminating all forms of disability discrimination and ensuring that disabled people, which is something I'm incredibly passionate about, are able to live freely and independently. It's not just about social care. It's about being able to live independently in your home and being able to navigate the world, our built environment, shops, cafes, restaurants, businesses, the whole infrastructure of a life independently. And we currently do not have that. Disabled people should be free from all forms of, exploitation, all forms of abuse. For example, hate crime. We know that disabled people continue to be abused in this way, and hate crime figures year on year continue to go up. We also would have what I would call an inclusive education system that goes way beyond just having, SEND provision within our schools, but it's truly about ensuring that, disabled people are fully incorporated within mainstream education. We only need to have certain settings as and when it is required. But I think the most important thing for me is showing that commitment and wanting to actually incorporate that convention into UK law would have shown a level of commitment by the government, and that hasn't happened. And Labour have continuously committed to incorporating it. We signed up to it, and we are fully believers in it, and we fully support it. I think if we look back over the last 11 years of what's happened to disabled people, there have been multiple inquiries, there have been multiple legal challenges, successful legal challenges against the government, who have been found to have been treating disabled people unlawfully when they've introduced changes in relation to social security benefits. And so, we are up against it, because I believe, and I know that this is the belief of many and the millions of disabled people around, that the government have created a hostile environment. And as a Christian, Tim, we believe in equality. We want to see justice everywhere, around the world, but also on our doorsteps. And it's so important, I think, that we look at our own communities and see where there is some injustice happening, and see how we as individuals, or as the body of Christ, or as the church, can seek to actually change and redress some of that.
And that's a great point, because I think we as Christians maybe sometimes shy away from the language of equalities, and we really shouldn't. If we look at the beginning of Genesis, people out there who are not Christians might say they believe in equality. I don't doubt that they do, but if you believe in equality on the basis of biological accident, or in our case believe in it because God created us with ultimate dignity, that's a different order of things. So Christians everywhere should be passionate about equality. And if we are people who are not members of marginalized groups discriminated against, I guess you'd tell us that it's important that we develop that empathy and stand alongside people who are on the wrong end of inequality.
Absolutely. And I think, we're supposed to be the hands and feet of Jesus. And if we look how Jesus modeled his life and how he was able to teach us how we should be doing life, and it's all about love, it's all about compassion, and it's and it's about justice. And I know it's in the small things, it's not in the big things. You don't have to go out and do these and say you're going to be going on this march or doing whatever. I can't think of the word to say there, Tim, to be fair, but I think the key here is having that understanding and that empathy, for one, but two, it's acting on that, because it's okay to say you understand. And it's okay to say, gosh, that's really wrong. But what small change or what small act can we do to make a difference? Understanding that, with disabled people now, we've just come out of a pandemic where I believe we were seen as an afterthought. And I think the numbers tell us that as well, where we know that 2/3 of all deaths were either from a disabled person or somebody with an underlying health condition. We know that the poverty levels are around half of those that are in poverty are either disabled or live with somebody that is disabled. So the evidence is there. But what are we going to do about it? As politicians, I will continue to challenge, hold this government to account, and where possible, try and work with colleagues to improve the lives of disabled people. But we also need to understand how it's impacting people in our local communities as well.
Well, Marsha, you give us a real manifesto, I guess, really, for what we should be doing as Christians in our communities. So we should be acting on that concern for equality in our own church. What does it look like? How accessible are we in our own society? How are we fighting for those values within the community? And then also politically, praying for right decisions and, graciously but firmly lobbying our members of parliament and others to make sure they take the rights of people with disabilities very, very seriously. Marsha, we are moved by you being a voice for the voiceless, and we're really, really grateful to you for giving us your time today. All the best.
Thank you very much for having me, Tim. All the very best.
Well, each week we answer a question from you, the listener, about how Christianity and politics can work together. Maybe you're thinking through a particular issue, or you're not sure why people disagree on a certain policy. If you've got a question, please write it in an email to farron@premier.org.uk. This week, we have a question from Terry from the Isle of Wight, and he's been in touch to tell us this. He says, I have to take exception at your rant, Tim, on Christians taking responsibility to their neighbours by getting jabbed. For those of us who refuse it, I guess we're not loving our neighbour, clearly. An American 29-year-old athlete who nearly died as a result of the vaccine said, with risk, there should be choice. I stand by that, and I think that you should make an apology to those who will feel abandoned by yet another person of influence. the science from those who have what I consider far more integrity than the majority of our MPs. And science advisors tells me that this whole affair is skewed towards those who profit out of all this. And please don't call me a conspiracist. Right, Terry, well, thanks for making that point. Let me say this quite quickly. I will vote in the House of Commons to defend your right to not take the vaccine. And as a brother, at the same time, I will rebuke you, because I think it is not loving to your neighbour to not take the vaccine. When all said and done, the best way to protect one another from this is to accept the vaccine. And Christians should care about the truth. And we should be careful who we listen to the truth from. We should be careful in discerning stuff that we read on the internet from unverified sources, and we should be able to weigh up between experts and those who are not. I'm not an expert. I'm guessing you aren't either. But it's important when we approach an issue like this that we consider the well-being of our neighbour. So like I say, I will fight very hard to defend your right to not take the vaccine, and will tick you off as a brother. So please take it for your good and everyone around you.
If you have a question for Tim, email farron@premier.org.uk.
As we come together at the end of this programme, let's join in prayer. Our loving Heavenly Father, we just thank you for Christmas. We thank you that it is the time we get to celebrate, in particular, the entry into this world of your precious Son, Jesus, who came to die for us, to rescue us, to save us. And we thank you that this is a time of year, even in our kind of increasingly post-Christian country and irreligious age, when it's sort of all right to talk about Jesus and the gospel. I ask that Christians everywhere throughout this country, in leadership positions, just amongst congregations everywhere, would take advantage of this opportunity to speak openly about you. This is a time of great flux, uncertainty, and indeed fear for many people out there. May you use this difficult time to open the hearts of millions of people to the offer that you make to every single one of us, that if we were to accept that greatest of all Christmas gifts, Jesus, into our lives, then meaning can be given to us and eternity can be ours with you. Lord, we just do pray for this Christmas time to be a time where your word is spoken widely, truthfully, heard and responded to by millions. And this we ask in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, we'll be taking a break over the next few weeks. Do join us again in the new year, or if you want to catch up on old episodes to, fill out the Christmas period, then head to your chosen podcast provider or head to premierchristianradio.com/Our Mucky Business. Thanks for listening. Have a wonderful Christmas.